alleviate these problems. For me, looking at it with the UK hat on, there is an enormous amount of wealth that sits in the pension system. It's the second largest pension system in the world, £3.4 trillion. But we have, when you start then looking at how do people make financial decisions, you very quickly realize that there is an appalling gulf of knowledge about not just financial things, but about numeracy. One of the privileges of being Lord Mayor of London is that you do a lot with the Lord Mayor's Appeal, with a lot of charitable work, a lot of philanthropic work. And you have the opportunity to long and hard about this, and I've decided that the right one to do is national numeracy. And the reason for that, although as a business person, as a finance person, financial literacy is the first thing that comes to my mind. You can't really think about literacy, financial literacy, if you don't have numeracy. And numeracy is not about being brilliant at maths. It's just not being afraid of numbers. So we have some pretty shocking statistics in the UK when I started looking at this, which is 48% of adults in the UK, 48% of adults in the UK, almost 1 in 2, has the numeracy level of a primary school child. When I say a primary school child, I mean it's a child of 12 years old. In Greater London, that percentage goes up to about 58%, because there's a lot of poverty around Greater London. People often think of London as being streets paved with gold. We've got the poorest boroughs in London as well, with some of the most deprived people. So it felt to me as if that was a really important priority. So that's one of the reasons why I'm focused on that. But when you start looking then at the implications of that lack of numeracy, lack of financial literacy, then you're getting into a cost of living crisis where people are unbanked. So if you talk to the banks at the moment in the UK, they'll tell you they're not seeing a significant change to loan loss provisions or bad debts. But that's because almost 20% of the population is unbanked. They don't meet the criteria. So financial inclusion is about providing a bridge for those people to have access to credit, because if they don't have access to credit, then they go to payday loans, payday lenders, and have to pay exorbitantly expensive debt payments. And it goes to insurance as well. If you're struggling with your finances and you have a small business and you need a van and you need to be able to borrow money for a van, you have to insure it. We need to be able to get the insurance industry to provide insurance premium waivers for people like this. So my idea, and this is what's proceeding, is in April of this year, I'm calling a financial inclusion and financial literacy conference. We'll do it in conjunction with the Financial Times, who have their great financial literacy and inclusion campaign. But we're going to involve a lot of charities that are involved with this, a lot of academics. University College London will be involved, a huge number of private sector businesses, because virtually every bank or insurance company or asset management company that you talk about understands this issue, understands how important it is, and is doing something educationally with children or with adults. So it felt to me, with all of these different initiatives, it was the right time to pull everybody together. And actually, I think if there's one message of this Davos, for me, it doesn't really matter what problem you're talking about. There is an enormous need for us to come together. Financial institutions are naturally very competitive, but there's a time when you've just got to pool your resources, come together, and find solutions. So that's the logic for that.
One other question: why do you think employers should get involved in this to take the pledge, and why should organisations support the campaign as their partner responsible? Could you give your views?
Yeah, so I think the issue often with these really important initiatives is it's very difficult to access the people who need the help most, and they need a prompt. So actually, employers are usually trusted partners, and particularly if they're going to pay for these things, because these services, you can't expect people to deliver these services for nothing. There is a cost involved. Somebody has to pick up that cost. So I think the most natural thing is for employers to do so. I'm very struck by, my day job, if you like, before I became Lord Mayor, is as chairman of a company called Phoenix Group, which has got 7,500 employees. It's a FTSE 100 life insurance and savings business. And I would say to anybody who's skeptical about large businesses, come and be a fly on the wall in a board meeting. You find that board will spend 80% of their time talking about customers, of course, but also about colleagues, employees. It's really important, particularly as we try and attract the younger generation to come and work in our businesses. These younger people care deeply about these issues. So there is I think we're pushing against an open door with employers who are just looking for opportunities to do things that will be really helpful for their employees. So I think there will be enormous appetite for this.
Well, I have to say thank you so much for your support for this cause. It means a lot to us. I'm going to turn to Jason Butler. Hopefully, Jason, you can hear us. Thank you so much for joining us. Jason is head of financial education at Salary Finance, but also writes for the Financial Times. Jason, what areas of personal finance do people tend to need the most support in? Could you talk a little bit about that? And because of time, I'm going to ask the second question here as well now. What kind of impact does it have on people's lives if they are financially literate? Could you share your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I spent 25 years advising very rich people about their finances. And so I've seen that side of the thing, and I've spent the last 7 years delivering financial education in the workplace. And recently I've become a volunteer advisor at the local Citizens Advice Bureau, which is in the UK, the free body that gives people consumer advice, debt advice, etc. So I've seen a very wide range of people. And one thing I've seen is that doesn't matter where it is in the world, is that essentially it boils down to a key number of things that people need help with. And as the Lord Mayor said, is that most people approach money but they don't have any kind of grounding in the skills that they need to be able to navigate and manage money and make wise choices. And so I thought what I'd do is I just work through just a couple of the high level principles of financial wellbeing, and then perhaps we can talk through a sort of checklist of simple ideas that employers can help their employees become first of all aware of, give them time to engage with, and then and sort of gradually sort of work forward. And one of the things I want to get across to people is that learning to be good or better with money isn't about perfection, and it isn't about big bang and overnight. It's about making small changes each day in our attitude, in our behaviours, our habits, and our choices, and so that we can live a full life. So if we think about, there are several different definitions of what it means to have high personal financial well-being, and it doesn't necessarily link to income, although income helps. It's just having an adequate income, having enough that's consistent income to meet your needs and being able to manage debt wisely. Not all debt is bad, but again, too much debt can be a bad thing. But feeling secure, it's not just a case of having the money and having the income, it's having that feeling of security is really essential. And that means having enough assets and savings that make sense to you. It may not necessarily be being wealthy or being rich, and having a plan. Now, a plan is not necessarily this big, all-encompassing, complex, great big document or something. It's just a sort of a rough framework that helps you frame your decisions, which of course, once you've got the short term sorted, you can then start thinking about longer term things. And this is the problem people have, this weighing up the short term gratification and needs and wants with what they need to do for their long term well-being. And having the knowledge. Now, I have given several hundred webinars and keynotes over the last 7 years in the workplace. And when I ask people in an audience, put your hands up if you were ever taught anything substantive and useful about managing your personal finances, if you were taught that at school or university. I can't remember the last time someone put their hand up. And I have given hundreds of talks. So is it only wonder that people don't understand this stuff and they feel embarrassed about it because they were never taught it? And so when we get initiatives like let's all learn maths for another 9 years after we leave school, that's the wrong angle. The angle is let's learn to be better with money and the choices that we make. So the financial knowledge is important. The other thing is having financial flexibility, being able to adapt to the variable rubbish that life throws at us. It's not a case of if, it's when trouble happens. They come in packs, they come in 3s and 4s, your car tire blows up or whatever. Having a positive attitude. One of the things I do a masterclass on mental well-being, and the point here is about if we believe we're a victim and that we can never change it and the world's against us, then it really makes it difficult for us to move forward. So helping people build those positive attitudes. And this is really important. This comes on to the employer. Having a financial or rather a support network, feeling connected to other people, whether that's colleagues or employer, whether that's sources of advice, professional advice, other people like you, feeling that you're not alone is really important. Sharing stories, sharing successes, having resilience, so being able to bounce back from the problems that happen in life, and having what we call life satisfaction. So an overall sense of satisfaction with your situation, that your life has meaning, and that you have enough money to do the things that you want to do. So that's the sort of general thing. And we created a 10-point checklist, which is going to evolve between now and when the initiative goes live. But I don't necessarily have to go through that, Daniel, if you don't want to. What was the second part of the question?
The second question was really in relation to today in the world as we see it. Could you tell us why you think that, what kind of impact will it have on people's lives if they aren't financially literate? You've touched on that. But in terms of the initiatives and the checkpoints you've put in place, I think it would be good actually to share some of those thoughts on those. I'd really appreciate it actually.
Well, I will do, but before I share the points, let me just share a very simple story. I interview a lot of salary finance customers. I've done 2 webinars today for salary finance. I'll be doing one this evening. I get massive amounts of feedback. They can ask live questions, and all of my message is always about you can do this. You're not on your own. Just move forward. And we have one gentleman that I interviewed for the company, and I asked him what his story was. And his story was he was deep in debt. He felt very embarrassed and ashamed. His wife had just had a baby. They were struggling. He felt less of a man. These are all things he told me. We've got it on camera. And his life really he felt like despair. Anyway, so the long and short of it was through a mixture of the financial education, consolidating his debts into a salary deducted loan that was more affordable and sensible. And then when he paid off the loan, he started to put money into savings deducted at source. And he said to me, the day that we got rid of the debt, we tidied everything up, we got rid of it, and then we started saving. She said, you look taller. So the lady said to her husband, you look taller. And he said, and I felt taller. He said, and I felt like a man. I felt like a person. He said, I felt like life was worth living. And I said to him, it's so lovely for you to share that with me. And he said, I couldn't have done it without you guys. And so, yes, he did the work and we've obviously helped him. But the point there was that it doesn't matter whether it's a colleague of yours, whether you're leadership, whether you're just joined a firm, or whether you're part of a charity. If you help just one person help themselves, and that's what this initiative is about. It's about, this isn't rocket science. It's simple but not easy, okay? And we have ingrained habits and beliefs that hold us back. Plus, there are real challenges if you're a carer or you're on a low income, etc. And so what we've done is we've said, look, let's create a 10-point checklist which you can use and just take a couple of them to do over the course of the month, okay? They won't take you that long, but don't try and do all of them, but just sort of gives you a framework. So for instance, very few people have a spending plan. Now let me say that again, spending plan, not budget. We don't have budgets. We don't do budgets. That's what accountants do. That's what people who don't have a life do. We say, have a spending plan. Because it's deciding where you want your money to go before you receive it, rather than wondering where it was, and getting the truth about your situation, and then starting to have a framework. So we developed a thing called the Smart Spending System, which is a one-page framework. Doesn't matter whether you're doing old school pen and paper, spreadsheets, budgeting apps or anything. It's helping you give yourself permission to have money for fun, money for the future, money for essentials. And then just having a plan to pay off debt. Now, it doesn't have to be a massive plan. It doesn't have to be all done tomorrow. So we were talking about the ways of paying off debt, building an emergency fund. That like if something goes wrong, and it doesn't have to be massive. Just starting an emergency fund and starting believing you're a saver. Shopping around for better deals. Do you know how many employers have I met where they've got discounts on their employee benefits portal, and only 10% of their staff use them? I mean, these are things like on groceries, on buying everyday stuff, which you could save 5, 10, 15%. Looking for ways for people to increase income. For instance, could it be training? Could it be more responsibility? How do I get that promotion? It's really building into that self-investing in yourself and just living below your means so that you don't increase your expenses every time you have a windfall or a pay increase because you're worth it.
Jason.
The other thing is investing in retirement. Now, this is not the same as thinking that you're putting money into a pension. It's basically investing in making work optional. So I love using that term. And when I say, would anyone like to know how to make paid work optional? You work because you want to. Everyone puts their hands up. If I say, would you like a 1-hour lecture about pension planning? No one wants to turn up. So again, language matters. And again, checking benefit packages. Most employers are providing massive amounts of stuff. And it's like it's like, you know, when you think you've got nothing to cook with. And my wife is a brilliant cook. I said, there's nothing to cook in this kitchen, but no food. Within an hour, she has got a Michelin star meal on the table. It's unbelievable.
Jason, I'm going to
And
interrupt you
again,
there.
financial education,
Jason?
educating and seeking out advice.
Jason, can I stop you for a sec? Because I've just got a few other questions to raise, and we're on time, so I'll come back to you. Forgive me. I'm going to move over to Par, the partner.
Just let Jason talk.
Just
let Jason talk.
Par, can I ask you, Gallup's done a lot of work around this area. Can I ask you, what data will you, in your view, be able to capture or would be important to capture to make this a success for Make Time for Money? And how will taking this kind of action impact organizational cultural change and behavior change in people?
Right. So I think Jason nailed so many really important points around. There's already so much being made available to employees in organizations, and the adoption rates range between 5% and in the really best organizations, 20% of employees who make use of what is being offered. And I think the pledge you have here is really about how do we get organizations to step up in taking those offers and those services to their people. I think the best way to evaluate impact is to, the last thing we typically do, ask people.
Yeah.
Right. Just ask the people who benefited from these services, across these hopefully 1,000 different companies that are doing this. Let's get feedback from people as in what impact has it had? Who has adopted some of the additional offers as a result of it? And this is not something that I think you or we can do, but organizations need to step up and step out. What is the business case? Because the one area I disagree with Jason, and I agree with everything he said, but he said, and if you can help one person, no, we're not helping one person. Organizations employ millions of people. I believe they have an obligation to help millions of people. And it would be, one, so easy. It wouldn't cost them much. In many cases, they're already making the investments, right? So it wouldn't cost them much. One, and two, the business case. So the business impact for these businesses. Gallup has studied a lot around well-being, what makes for a life well lived. Like Jason pointed out perfectly, financial well-being is one of those critical elements for a life well lived. It's not about how much money you make. The stability and security of your income is twice as important as how much money you actually make. It's not about how much money you make. It's about, can you plan? I mean, we should just listen to Jason more because I think he nailed it. But when individual employees are able to enjoy that level of I can plan. I know what's coming. I might not be a millionaire, but I kind of know where I'll be 2-3 months down the line. It actually translates into behaviors that benefit the organization. It makes them more resilient. You think of all of us in our organizations that are dealing with transformation, sort of change fatigue, employees who just want to run away and hide from the change. But you help them build their financial well-being. In addition to other dimensions of well-being, right? Social well-being, make them build relationships, people they can trust. Make them into, there are many more dimensions, four other dimensions, but financial well-being is one of those dimensions where when it's fulfilled, you have a workforce that is a lot more willing to support changes, a lot more able to deal with ambiguity, because they have that sense of stability elsewhere in their lives. And who benefits at the end of the day? The many organizations that are today paying for millions of employees, 18% of whom are not only not creating value, they're actually destroying value in the organizations they work in. Not because they're bad people, but because they don't feel cared for. They don't feel anybody's taking a step. And one final point on the adoption rates. What organizations need to step into, the space they need to step into, and it's great to have these external people coming in and helping to build their financial literacy. It's great. But what we find is that for employees to actually adopt those offerings that have been made by their organization, it's less about how well it's marketed in the organization, it's more about how well it's framed and positioned. The single most important determinant is, does my manager talk to me about it? So if I have a boss who, just casually mentions, hey, we offer that, have you checked it out? You see adoption rates go up because I know we are democracy and it's not all about the boss, but the data shows it is all about your boss. Your state of mind, your well-being, 70% of the variance in how you experience work is related directly to who's your boss. So I think that's the opportunity for organizations. How do we leverage that resource, which are thousands or millions of managers we have, to help them be part of the solution? And I think that's what organizations.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you for Gallup's support on this campaign. Can I move to Anna? Anna, you touched on a few points which I think are fascinating. Number one, how do you reach a billion? How do you unlock the power of social media to achieve that? And particularly while this campaign initially is focused on employers and employees around the world, the youth is a big aspect of this. I had the honour of meeting Princess Beatrice earlier this week, and we talked about the fact that we need to get the youth behind this, and that's kind of the next phase of the campaign as well that we want to do. Could you talk a little bit about that and your work? I think I just want to highlight the work that the report that Oliver Wyman has led for the last 2 years, reviewing 150,000 people and the generation that's changing everything. It's called What Business Needs to Know. And I think some of the data in that is very relevant to the work we're doing as well.
Absolutely, and I've noticed that we've all started speeding up in terms of how we're speaking as we see the minutes running by.
Yes.
So I'm going to be the American, and I'm going to do a deep breath and slow down and say, I'm only going to focus on 3 points because a lot of really, really good points have been made. Oliver Wyman's partnered with you and many other organizations on financial inclusion for many, many years. And I think the challenge is that in many ways, particularly when we look at the younger generation, things aren't actually getting better. They're getting worse. And Lord Mayor touched on a number of those issues, and I think because of that, we really have to be bold and we have to think outside of the box. And we have to think of creative solutions to reach a billion and not say 1 or a million even is enough. Some interesting stats that I pulled out before we came. People are still very much not financially literate. So Generation Z is 59% likelier to say they know next to nothing about personal finance compared to others. 10% of Gen Z in the US particularly know the difference between different retirement products. 10%. And then you think about, and you're surprised about, why do they have all this anxiety? Why do they have financial anxiety? Why do they have anxiety about their future lives? And, half of them, of the younger generation, really worry about that financial stability and where the world is heading, particularly when they see, they've gone through the pandemic, they see everything that's happening around them. So should we be surprised that the younger generations are 2 times more likely to report mental health issues, that they're 2 times more likely to use healthcare for mental health issues, which has all sorts of downstream implications well outside of financial inclusion. So I think, there's a huge need that goes back to the billion for both the financial literacy, and I think particularly differentiating the good versus bad advice in terms of financial literacy. 60% of Gen Z find their news on social media, right? Twice the amount of traditional media. And what do you find on social media? Well, if I pick on TikTok, where many in Generation Z are, only 2/3 of Fortune 100 companies are on TikTok. Are we reaching them there? No, we're not reaching them there. We're reaching them through a variety of products, both through businesses and NGOs and others that are providing them around financial literacy. But we're not meeting them where they are. And I think if you're thinking about, how do we go from 1 million to 1 billion, and we really made these big commitments to create change, which I think will be very beneficial to both organizations as well as to broader societies and stability in societies, not to mention, income and everything else. We really have to meet them where they are because we're seeing a downward trend and we're not reversing that trend. So the second point was kind of around anxiety. And I think the third one is really around this access. In some ways, Gen Z have access to more financial inclusion offerings than ever, right? Everything is democratized online. They can reach different, sources of information. Some of those are good. Some are, certified financial advisors and CPAs and things like that. But as we saw, with 20% of them still believing that COVID is a hoax, many of them are not necessarily good advice. And so, when we think about that, I think we have to encourage access to the younger generations, meet them where they are. And I think we also have to deal with kind of the fragmentation that we've seen in the support for financial inclusion products and for financial inclusion training, because there's been many organizations that have done a tremendous amount of good, but we are only able to move the needle jointly if we actually cooperate and work together. And I think that goes back to what Lord Mayor was saying about many of the conversations here. So when I think about financial inclusion, I think about, stability, and using the word stability and giving back the control to the individuals in a very different way than many of the conversations around Davos have been around stability.
I think you touched on something that's really important to me. I think it's collaboration. Collaboration is, I've said a number of times during Davos this week in my talks, the new competitive advantage. And we're delighted to have the FT working with us. John really gave an interview earlier this week showing his support for the campaign. I think they're doing some tremendous work to reach the business community. This week we had a pledge from Forbes to get behind the campaign. They reached about 150 million people worldwide with that brand. But then we also met this week a number of influencers collectively that reach about 500 million people. And we think that's the only way that we can reach that billion is by working with influencers who correctly said to meet people where they need to be.
Well, we have an influencer in the audience here, Effie, who I met walking up on the way here.
Effie, let's turn to you for a few minutes because we've only got a few minutes left. And then what we'll do is we'll let everyone on the website, maketimeformoney.org. All the information will be there. All the companies can go on there and register for the pledge, and all the information will be shared there. But Effie, you are a global influencer in the fintech space. You very kindly agreed to come to join this panel. Could you share your thoughts on why you're getting behind it as an influencer?
Thank you so much, and I'm with not pleasure, I'm delighted to be behind this. And we need more women influencers to get behind this because we have abilities to network, to inspire, to have ripple effects that are not realized yet, I think. And if there's anybody that disagrees, please, tell me why you disagree. For me, it's extremely important, your timing, because we unfortunately have more financially fragile people, meaning more people are joining the financially fragile class that is not, illiterate. But for the first time, they're becoming financially fragile, they need help. So we have mounting problems from the existing, zero literacy to others that were fortunate up to now and are going to be in a difficult situation. They will need advice too. So lots of work to do, and we all need to collaborate in this world. Also, employees, your point for me is very, very important. Why? Because employers are the ones that can really nurture people. Employers are not there to pay you for the task that you're doing, for a job that you're doing. They're there to nurture you to be that person that can contribute and be productive towards the purpose of the business. We're talking about stakeholder capitalism and purpose-driven businesses, so we have to focus on the people within the company. Not only the customers, we've been talking about, customer-driven and customer centricity, people-driven, and let's start with the people working in the companies.
Absolutely.
That will change it all.
So if I can make one point on top of that is right now, Gen Z, right now, 45% of Gen Z in the US and the UK have side hustles.
Wow.
45%. Imagine if you're based an employer in the US and the UK and 45% of your employees are side hustling. So not having financial stability as an individual and not moving towards financial inclusion has massive impact because they're not only doing the side hustles, simply because some are doing it because they want a sense of community, but many are, particularly women, are doing it because they simply need the additional income. So if you think about it from the employer perspective, imagine what you could do if we actually had that stability. So lots of knock-on effects.
I'm going to close because I know the Lord Mayor has to go on to another meeting. And Jason, with your permission, what I'm going to say is if we can place those bullet points on the website as well, that would be great for everyone to see. But I just want to thank everyone this week at the World Economic Forum for the WEF support in relation to this initiative. Particularly, I want to call out the big banks that have been supportive to us. Citigroup has been tremendously supportive. Jane Fraser, Colin Bell, I met with this week, the CEO of HSBC, and a number of others who have been immensely helpful to us. And that's the only way we're going to move the needle there to really do this. And I'm thanking you and all of you in this room and all of you watching live to get behind this campaign. We can do this, we can achieve it. It takes time, but it's like a snowball. It starts to build and it gets an effect. And I think more and more people will join the pledge. So would you like to share any final comments, Lord Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to congratulate you. I think a lot of us get involved in a lot of different initiatives. We see something that we think is great and we get involved, but it takes a different sort of mentality to actually start it and drive it and own it and promote it, and that's what you've done. And I have huge admiration for you for what you've done, Daniel. I know very strong personal motivations for doing it. But this is such an important issue, that a societal issue that we're having to face. And this really will change lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know you have to run, so.
I'm very reluctant to give up these.
Thank you so much.
Recordings.
Oh, you want me in it? Okay.